I was reading the book and I could not put it down. I would stay up till past midnight often, and sometimes because there's a little bit of Larry McMurtry in this book with you where you don't. It's not like it's not like a good guys always wins. Bad things happen, and they just kind of happen, and you get kind of shocked by it, especially with the South Sudan part of the book and what goes on, and I would just get frustrated, and Annette would say, "Well, you don't like the book?" I said, "I love the book. I'm just mad at John because I just wish some of this stuff wouldn't happen." How much? What would you hope the reader would get out of the part of this that takes place in South Sudan and all that goes on there?
First of all, I would like to think that it will somehow raise awareness among the people who read the book, and maybe they know something about what the South Sudanese people have endured for 50 years and what it's like there now, and what it's like for those millions of South Sudanese people who are still living in refugee camps in other countries. They're career permanently displaced refugees. They can't go home because it's not safe. They can't go home because there's nothing left at home. And so Sooley, our hero, once he gets over here to play basketball in a summer showcase, bad things happen to his village and to his family, and he cannot go home. And that's true for so many of these people. It's really it's a huge tragedy, and it's growing. There are more refugees every day than there were, last week, and it's a humanitarian crisis. And maybe if I give the readers, something to think about, that's all I can ask for.
Well, you gave me a lot to think about.
Well, you've always, well, as I say always, but not infrequently, you've woven some of the things you care about in the book: student loan debt.
Yeah.
I remember, I think maybe in The Street Lawyer, and of course, The Chamber with the death penalty and confession and those books. So it's not that that's so unusual for you to have done that, but it's particularly poignantly done in this book, I think. Again, this just to because I think it's a compliment to you and to Hemingway, but with his Ken Burns' latest thing, and I'm sure our readers, this review, the Ken Burns story on Ernest Hemingway. One of the things they quoted Hemingway saying was, and it refers to what we're talking about in this book that's not just about basketball, says, Hemingway said, "If it is all beautiful, you can't believe in it. Things aren't that way. It's only by showing both sides, 3 dimensions, and possible 4, that you can write the way I want to." So I thought that was particularly poignant for this book and what he was trying to do, and obviously what you were trying to do this time. So congratulations on that. The best basketball book I'd read before this was Pat Conroy's Losing Season. I don't know if you read that.
I read it when it came out. Pat and I were pretty good friends for the past 20 years of his life, last 20 years of his life. He died 4 or 5 years ago. And we would send each other the books each year. And so that meant that Pat got a book a year from me. And I had to wait 10 years to get one. And there was a lot of verbal abuse back and forth with Pat, and a lot of fun, a lot of jokes. But he played basketball for the Citadel, and I accused him of greatly exaggerating his talents. He's a short white guy, you can't be that good. And but he played at that level. He played college basketball, and he loved the sport. So I enjoyed that book. When I started writing Sooley a year ago, I did a little research and trying to find the great basketball novel. When I wrote Calico Joe 10 years ago, I did the same thing. Most of the great baseball novels I had read over the years, and there's a lot of them. Baseball has a very rich literary tradition. There are fewer good football novels, but still some very good ones. I couldn't find any basketball novels. There are a lot of good basketball books like Season on the Brink by John Feinstein, the Indiana story from 1986 or something, a season with Bobby Knight. That would have to be, it was very colorful. But a lot of great books about the players. Every coach has got a book out. There's a lot of basketball literature, but I found some novels, but they weren't that great. So I was, happy to try to write a really good basketball novel.
I'll say one thing. I've heard you mention this, I think, once before, but one of my heroes, and really one of the role models of my life, was a fictional ball player called Chip Hilton. And Claire B was his the writer that did those books. And when I was in elementary school, I read every one of those books. And I even wrote Claire B a letter. He wrote me back, telling me he hoped I was still a good student in school. Just don't spend all your time on sports, But I mean, I cared about that so much. And I think, haven't I heard you say before that Chip Hilton was one of your boyhood literary heroes?
Well, what happened, I was in the 6th grade in Ripley, Mississippi. We lived there for 1 year. And I discovered the Chip Hilton series in the library. I was 11 years old. And there are about 15 of them. And I wiped those things out in a matter of, a couple of weeks, just as fast as I could get them, because I love sports and I love Chip Hilton. And it's funny you say that, because last week I got a gift from a writer I know in New York City. At some point I'd mentioned the Chip Hilton series as being my first really great reading experience. The one I remember. And excuse me a second. This person sent me a first edition of the Chip Hilton. It's called Strike 3 by Claire B. And there's Chip on the cover. I mean, Chip played all 3 sports. He was All-American in all 3 sports. His teams rarely lost. It was all this great stuff that we loved as kids. And that was my first, wonderful reading experience.
I would think we have read them, and
I read all of them. I think we have all of them.
I gave it to my son Jack. He and your son are law school friends, and passed them down. I'm gonna read them to my grandchildren when they come through.
I was intrigued by it. It came out. This one came out, and by the way, there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 20 of them, I guess. And there's and then the Chip Hilton series. The book came out in 1949 by Grosset and Dunlap Incorporated. Here's the dedication. He says to Dave Lowe, patriot, student, athlete. He gave all he had for his country and his team. Dave Lowe was the regular varsity catcher for Long Island University baseball team for 3 years. He lost his life flying over Germany during World War II. So that's how far back these things go. It's inspired by a real character who died in World War II.
So is that part of the inspiration from Theodore Boone?
Theodore Boone was inspired. I like the idea of a series.
Yeah.
Because once you get the kids hooked on a series, you can, they'll read all of them. Their parents will buy all of them to satisfy the bookstores and the writers. The inspiration for Theodore Boone came really from my daughter, Shay, who was her first year of teaching school. She had a bunch of 5th graders, and she asked me one night over dinner, she asked if I could write suspense for kids. I never thought about it. She said she was having a hard time finding good suspense for kids. There are plenty of other books for kids, historical fiction and fantasy and, plenty of books. But she was trying to find suspense. And I took that as a challenge. And that's where Theodore Boone came from.
Well, my youngest daughter's boyfriend, when he was graduating from high school, I was trying to give him something and ask him what he read. He said, really, my favorite books when I was by far growing up, Theodore Boone. I gave him a signed copy of one of your books for high school graduation. But,
yeah, that's a nice. That's a nice. Well,
thank you, Jack.
Without, I don't want to be. I don't want to have any sort of spoiler thing. But as far as your inspiration for Sooley. I remember a University of Maryland basketball player that had some difficult times, so to speak. I'd say, particularly, and of course, it's obvious we do have players from Africa and things. Bowl is knocking down, cereal boxes on commercials still. My new Bowl is, but do you want to talk a little bit about as much as you care to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It's not surprising.
easy to talk about. There were several inspirations for Sooley. The first being just a love for sports and college athletics. We go to a lot of college basketball games here at UVA. We live in Charlottesville. And Renee, as you know, is a big Tar Heel. So we go to a bunch of games in Chapel Hill. And a big part of our winter and early spring is back and forth to basketball games. You know, who's at home this weekend? Where are we going? Renee, my daughter Shay is in Raleigh now with 2 grandkids. So we're down there a lot anyway. And somehow it always coincides with the basketball game. So, you know, I just really like sports. I like to write about sports. I like to read good short sports novels. That's what the first 3 were, Bleachers and Playing for Pizza and Calico Joe. I always wanted to write a basketball novel about college basketball. About 2 or 3 years ago, I read a magazine article. I think it was online. Excuse me.
Get there if you need to.
That's not important. It was a story about this team from South Sudan playing in a summer showcase tournament in the U.S. and how they had just captured the attention of the audience and the scouts and the spectators by the way they played. Extremely energetic, enthusiastic, big smiles, slamming dunks and blocking shots, and they became just the sensation of the tournament. They slaughtered everybody in the tournament, and they were very humble, and they were never cocky, but sure of themselves. And that was an inspiration. Another inspiration was here at UVA 4 or 5 years ago. A kid showed up from Ghana, Monty Diakite, and he didn't play much his first 2 years. Big, tall, lanky kid who kept growing. But by his senior year, last year, he was starting and blocking shots, and 6'9", jumped through the roof, just became he was drafted in the second round by an NBA team and made a roster. I think he's playing now in the NBA. But we just loved that kid. He had big smiles and great enthusiasm and never quit, you know. So all those things kind of converged into one story. So there were, and also you mentioned Len Bias. This is ACC country, and the people here like to talk about the great players. It's, you know, serious basketball country. And back in the early 1980s, when Michael Jordan was, you know, rampaging through the ACC, he had a rival. Len Bias at the University of Maryland was his equal. And some of the old timers say he was even better. But they really were 2 great players headed for greatness and whatever in the NBA. And Len Bias was drafted in the first round by the Boston Celtics in 83 or 84. And 2 days after he was drafted, he died of an overdose. And he was not a drug user. He was a nice young man who got in with the wrong crowd one night and took something he wasn't sure of, and he died. And it was a huge tragedy because that's why I like sad sports stories. It was, I'm not giving away the ending of Sooley. I'm not going to do that. But it was a huge, it's like Calico Joe, the loss of potential, the loss of what could, forever, people will say, God, what could have been if not for tragedy. And so all those elements converged into this big pot where I kept stirring it and trying to come up with a story. And so finally I did.
Yeah, well, it's a great confluence.
Yeah, and I don't want to give away anything either, but I really would like for people to read the book quickly so I can talk to them about it, because there's a lot to unpack in that book. I want to read basically 3 sentences in your book. You may have forgotten what you wrote, but I'm always amazed at how in how few words you can set a tone for an entire team in this aspect. You said a 4-game losing streak will breed discontent in any locker room, and Central's was no exception. Jabari Nix was a sophomore forward who had averaged 5 minutes a game the year before and got about the same in the early games. His best friend was Darrell Compton, a 5'10" guard who couldn't shoot, and they were both dissatisfied with their playing time, and it was obvious that they were unhappy. I thought that sets it. You understand that whole team right there. You got bad players who are unhappy that they're not getting more playing time.
it's the locker room is so crucial to winning, and in any sport, you've got to have a happy locker room. You've got to have strong leaders, players, not coaches, leaders on the team who can control the locker room. And especially in basketball, when you've only got 5 guys playing at one time, as opposed to the other sports, other team sports. If you've got one guy taking too many shots, you're going to have some problems in the locker room. If you've got a guy who's not hustling, or if you've got guys who are not happy riding the bench, you got a problem. And the locker room is so crucial to success in basketball.
I'll say this, though, a little more R&D you've done as a Little League baseball coach, and as I had that same opportunity to do, you had another line in the book that said something, it's amazing what a little playing time will do to the happiness of the parent.
The parents.
Yeah, the parents. Yeah. The parents keep pretty close clock on playing time.
I'll tell you what, it was a revelation to me a couple of years ago when I got to know Tony Bennett pretty well, the coach here at UVA, and we were talking, over dinner one night, and he said something about the parents, and I said, Coach, you don't have to deal with the parents, do you? And he just burst out laughing. He said, are you kidding me? He said, the parents these days are terrible. The helicopter parents, especially if you have a great athlete, his parents have big dreams. He said the older the kids get in college, the worse the parents become. And I said, you have to deal with it. He said, yes, you have to deal with that because you spend so much time with the kids and their mamas, convincing them that this is the right place for their kid to come play basketball. So you have to have a relationship with the family because you want to keep the kid happy. You want to keep the parents happy. And, these people have access to you. And if there's not enough playing time or any other issue, it's something they really have to deal with. That's been compounded greatly by the new transfer rule.
Transfer portal. Vanderbilt just lost the #1 rebounder in the SEC to go home to Texas this year with he can play for them next year.
It's insanity. And I can't imagine the coaches enjoying it because it's going to wreak havoc. Not only, so if you're a coach, you have a hotshot freshman who may be unhappy with his playing time. You got to be careful to keep him in the game enough so he won't leave you. So that affects the way you coach your team. I mean, it's just awful. And
with the Junction, agree the Junction boys where Paul Bear Bryant sequestered his team in the middle of the night off for 2 months to practice somewhere else because he couldn't take the heat of the parents coaching him every day.
And that was 40 years ago. It's I can't imagine what it's like now. I know guys who quit coaching in high school, in baseball, lacrosse, basketball around here at our school, other schools. They just quit coaching because the parents were impossible. We see it at every level. You guys see it, it's everywhere. The expectations are so enormous, especially if the kid is showing some talent at the age of 12. The parents just go nuts.
Well, one of the things that if people look when they get the book, it's in 3 parts, and there's always the tension back and forth with the refugee camp in Uganda and this great disparity of wealth and opportunity, and just how absolute that is. But basically, the part 2 must have been so much fun to write about the games and just how the plays win and as the team starts turning around and get. I know, just in backyard basketball with my son, just pretending, and 10 seconds left, and the passes to the corner, and Jack gets up, and it's good, and we beat UT or whatever. I mean, to have, I can tell how much fun that must have been to write that part 2 as the tournament and the season went on.
It was a real challenge because the book covers 8 games in the summer showcase. Then it covers an entire 30-game season. Then you get to March Madness and the playoffs there, and the team makes a deep run into March. So there's a ton of basketball, and you can't describe 40-plus games without killing your reader. So I had to brush by some pretty fast because other games you have to go into some detail, but trying to write a story about what happens in a basketball game, it's challenging, put it that way. And some stuff is very specific. Like my favorite scene in the whole book is when Sooley, in a big game, I won't tell you the details, but I won't spoil it for the reader, but Sooley hits 5 consecutive 3-point shots in a very short period of time to bring his team back from defeat. Okay. And I was so excited when I was writing that. I had to settle myself down, and I kept telling myself, well, if you're having this much fun writing this, maybe your readers will share your excitement when they read it. So it was a lot of fun to write. And also, I don't know the game. I know the game well enough to enjoy it, from the sideline, but I don't understand all the strategies, and it's a very complex game. Different defenses and offenses, and how a team can change defense in a split second. What's the signal from the bench? What does the coach do? How do you call the offensive plays? How do when do you switch? When do you? It's a fast game, and it's complicated. I don't know all that stuff, and so I didn't go in it too deep.
Right.
Well, but I think obviously when people see your picture in the back of the book, they'll know that you were a player.
Yeah, I'm going to show this to the fans here instead of his usual in a sports shirt from Reed's picture there.
Fancy
John. There he is, right there. Excuse me, Scott. I just love the caption. He went unnoticed by college recruiters. I thought that was not that you weren't good enough; you just weren't noticed.
Thoroughly unnoticed. That was the end of my career. That was a 16-year-old junior when that picture was taken. And the first year we had the brand new high school at South Haven, and I played football, basketball, and baseball. That basketball team right there won 1 and lost 24, and the whole team was coming back next year.
That sounds like
my senior year cannot be any better than my junior year. I don't want to go through this again, so I didn't play. That's why I stopped playing basketball. I said I'm not any good. The team is not any good. I'm going to quit.
I sound like Vanderbilt football team one year. They went 2-10, and they said the strengths was the whole offensive line will be back next year. And I said, well, I feel sorry for the quarterback. One more thing, Scott. I think that must have been fun this is a spoiler alert, but to have Duke been beaten, if you're such a UVA and a Tar Heel fan, to have Duke go down.
I've got to be very careful. I have a lot of respect for Coach K and his program. I'm good buddies with Mike Jaminski, who was an All-American there right before Coach K came. I have a lot of Duke friends, but my family's all Tar Heel. And, I didn't go to either school, so I don't get in the middle of it because my son went to UVA. But let's just say somebody had to lose a big game, and it was Duke.
What were you surprised at March Madness this year, where teams in your book made March Madness? A South Sudan player got a lot of press. I mean, there was a lot of your book in real time, real life March Madness this year. Did that surprise you?
Not really. It's such a part of the game. There have been so many great players to come from Africa and from South Sudan. Luol Deng was an All-American in 2007, one and done at Duke, and has gone on to have a very long and a very lucrative professional career. He's one of several from South Sudan. They grow them tall, and they're quick and fast, and they're great athletes. But no, I mean, Baylor won it all. They had 2 kids from Africa on the starting 5, just great players who clogged up the inside and made it impossible to lose. And yeah, some of the same teams are always there. It was fun to pick out which team was going to win, which team was going to lose. That's the beauty of fiction.
How'd your brackets do this year?
I think I've stopped doing them because I always try to pick the Cinderella, which is impossible to do. Most folks take the top 4 seeds, and that's your final 4. That never happens. Although this year the first and second seeds met for the final game, which is unusual. But sometimes I'll start with the Sweet 16. Once you get through the early rounds and have all the big upsets, it's more fun to take the Sweet 16 and then try to pick the Final 4 and the national champion. But I sure don't put any money on it.
Get back to sort of unsung heroes of the book in your kind of heart tug for the people doing the work on the ground. That was certainly a heroic Doctors Without Borders nurse, Christine, that helped the family get together, and just acknowledging people like her that are out there in the world doing this work that a contribution could help.
Yeah, I use two real nonprofits, Doctors Without Borders and the ISG. What's it called? It's International Rescue Committee, IRC. They're here in Charlottesville. Two great outfits, and we have we've been involved with Doctors Without Borders for 20 years, and get all their publications and see the work they do. And I don't know, these people are better people than I am. These doctors and nurses who will go off to places like South Sudan, or anywhere there's a crisis, anywhere there's a humanitarian crisis, they go there. They're on the front lines, risking a lot, oftentimes their lives, to help people. And again, it takes a lot of character and a lot of courage.
You had a dad who runs a food pantry, a food bank in Durham, and a mother who's an immigration lawyer.
Yeah, really good people. His roommate is Murray Walker. Murray is a scholarship player at Central, and the coach knew that Murray's family would step up and practically adopt Sooley once he got to Durham, and also knowing what happened to his family back in South Sudan. He needed a lot of love and a lot of support, and he got it with Murray's family. Very strong family. Who I love the scene where he and Murray are delivering food from the food bank. Excuse me, the Durham food bank. And Sooley at first is confused because he could not believe there were hungry and poor people in America. And Murray said, "I'll show you some. There are plenty of them out there."
Yeah. Hey, I always try to do one writer's question to get the insight from one of the greatest writers that ever lived. But you said that you never start a book without knowing how it's going to end. You also say that you chart out your book chapter by chapter. But if you individualize that chapter by chapter, how much do you have a entry point into the chapter and then an exit point, and then whatever comes, or you pretty much, how detailed do you get in your outline?
Well, the chapter outline is usually one paragraph. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen in this chapter? Or a couple of sentences, 3 sentences maybe. You do that to pacing is so crucial. I'm always concerned with pacing, and so to do that, you've got to know what's in the chapters, and are they too long, too short, whatever. That's a constant challenge every day. Is how long do you keep a chapter? When do you break it up? When do you give the reader a break? When do you switch scenes completely or go to a different subplot? That's why the outlining is so important, because you got to work that stuff out ahead of time before you start the book. Because if you always know where you're going, it's hard to get lost. And writers are notorious for having a brilliant idea, jumping into the novel, writing like crazy for a year, and then realize they don't know where to go next, or what the end is, and they've written themselves into a corner. That is fairly common in this business, and I'm not going to do that. I want to know what the ending is, and so I keep the chapter summaries fairly succinct, and I'm always tinkering with them. Once I have the outline finished, it doesn't stay like that. I'll start the book. If the outline works, I'll start the book, but I'm always tinkering with the outline too. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and by the time it's finished, I can't even read the thing. It's so messy. But that's how I handle that.
I know we've come to a close. I got 2 things kind of on what's next. One, the last time we talked, one of the surmisals was whether or not Matthew McConaughey might be cast if they did A Time for Mercy as a movie again. Was he the right age again for Jake? And do you want to comment on that?
Well, it's been reported that the deal is on with Matthew to do it. Matthew wants to do it. He's 25 years older than he was Time to Kill. So they'll probably move up the timeline a bit. I mean, he still looks pretty darn good to be 50 years old. So he can play anything. They're doing the screenplay now. He wants to do a 6 to 8 part limited series on Netflix or HBO or one of the big ones. And if Matthew wants to do it, it's going to happen because he has that much clout. And Time to Kill brings back so many just incredible memories for so many people. And that's when he got his start. And he's always acknowledged that. And we've talked a couple of times, and he's in. So, again, as I always say with movies, don't believe it until they start filming, because once they start filming, the money's hit the ground and something's going to happen. So that's along those same lines. This happened 3 days ago. Calico Joe came out maybe 10 years ago. And when it came out, I didn't know this, but Bob Dylan likes movies, and Bob Dylan read the book, and he got his people to call and see if the film rights were available, and they were not. We'd signed an option to somebody else. So he, 2 years went by, and he read the book again, and he called again, and we had him tied up again. Well, he called last summer. He couldn't tour, so he was stuck at home, and he read the book again, and he just for some reason really likes the book. And I got a phone call on a Saturday afternoon from my agent last summer, and he said, "Guess who wants to film Calico Joe?" Tell me. He said, "Bob Dylan." And I said, "I thought he was a singer, not an actor." It turns out he likes to invest in movies.
Yeah.
Long story short, I said, "Sure, it sounds like fun. I'm not going to make the movie." And so Dylan then went straight to George Clooney and talked George into not only writing the screenplay, but to direct the movie. And I had my first Zoom with Clooney and his producer last week. They've written the screenplay. It's very good. It's very faithful to the novel. And so that may be the next thing filmed, is Calico Joe, but with Clooney directing and Bob Dylan producing. So that could be fun down the road.
Well, your fans can know that we are now ordering more copies of Calico Joe. Maybe with COVID over, maybe, even if it's certainly not your whole tour again, but just to get out and be able, with vaccinations and things, to see actual fans and readers. If you ever make your way down to the Deep South again, we'd love to see you in person. But this certainly has been nice seeing you again, and thank you. And I think maybe the title of your next book, you want to push that?
Yeah, we just agreed on the title. It's called The Judge's List. It's another story involving Lacey Stoltz that you met 5 years ago in The Whistler.
Yeah.
She's the protagonist, and she is once again investigating allegations of a corrupt judge in Florida. This judge is really up to some bad stuff, and she has to go in and start investigating. So it's a real suspenseful story.
Woman superhero, legal superhero.
Yep, sorry, Lacey Stoltz.
Your group told our group that you've got a hard stop, and we want to respect that. But I cannot tell you how much we appreciate.
Go ahead and tell us.
Okay, I will tell you. We really appreciate all the years that you've been willing to do this with us, and even you're as good a guy as people think you are.
Well, thank you, Scott. It's always fun visiting you guys. You guys were there at the very beginning with the Time to Kill in June of 1989, and you've been there for every book since then. And we've all had fun visiting and doing long signings and short signings and selling lots of books. So thanks to you guys.
Well, it's been 32 great years. Good luck to you, John. Thank you. And to all the readers out there, it goes on sale tomorrow. Find a
Y'all.
copy and let's talk right here. Thank you.
See y'all. Take care.
Bye.